2 2. Test 1 2. 1 2.
kind of hear us good. Yeah, it's perfect. Great. Testing. It works. Good afternoon, people, and welcome to the FACE Summit 2023. So the first thing I want to say is, can we get a round of applause? Really lift this thing up. So the reason I say that is because actually it's really not that easy to put on these kind of events, and the panelists to be here, everyone in the background, the dude who's doing the sound and the engineering over there, live streaming. So this is quite a complex agenda that everyone's working through. So I think we need to be, I don't know, just thankful that all the academics involved are often working in their spare time to make this happen. So that's the reason for the round of applause. The other reason is because, of course, it means that FACE still exists. we're still going and we're still fighting and we're still respectful of everybody's presence here, and for Central St. Martin. So, my name is Andrew Eby, and I am one of the co-founders of FACE, and I'm going to introduce you to, I need to get Darla's role correct, so I need to put my glasses on. Thank you. I never have to bend down. Cheers, that's much better. So I'm going to introduce you to Professor Darla Jane Gilroy. She is the Associate Dean of Knowledge Exchange and a reader in Fashion and Enterprise. So let's have another round of applause, thank you.
Put my glasses on. Can you all hear me? This isn't too... Okay, so I've been introduced. I've been at CSM now for the last 2 years, but I've been at UAL for much longer than that. I've actually been here for 11 years. And I was really delighted to be asked to welcome you today to this summit, because last year I played a very, very small and insignificant role in supporting some of the funding for the summit last year. And it's really important for me that this work continues. So it's great to welcome you here. And it's also very important for me to welcome you in what is the 75th year of the anniversary of the arrival of the Windrush. I've been quite involved in some of the events around that celebration. And I think for us here, we have parents, we have grandparents, we may even now have great-grandparents that have been part of that journey. And we talk very often about the resilience of that generation. Actually, for me, we need to talk about the fact that that generation created, problem solving, they were creative, they were inventive, they laid the groundwork for the opportunities that we have all had. So, I think also that generation played a key role in the birth of multicultural Britain after the Second World War. And that was a kind of pivotal moment in our history as people of colour here in the UK, in terms of the sort of shaping of British society, and again, the sort of opportunities that has brought. But coming here today made me reflect on my own journey. I was a student at CSM many years ago when I studied fashion. I had a long career in the fashion industry. I then became an academic, and I've played a pivotal role in developing, the visibility of black academics here at UAL. And I thought, what are the ambitions of FACE and how do they reflect my story? And just the fact that I have spent most of my career being the only one or one of few in so many situations, it really heartens me to be here today in a room full of other academics of colour. This is something that would not have happened when I first entered education. So again, I think this is a kind of pivotal moment for the work that FACE is doing. However, I was very interested this morning. I was actually in a meeting and we were talking about statistics at the university and our data. And what our data tells us here at UAL is that 52% of the students that now study with us are students of colour. So as an institution, we are now addressing students of colour as the majority of our community. Are we recognising that? Are we understanding that the role that we need to play in terms of keeping race on the agenda in education and in the fashion industry? I'm not sure, but what I would say is that I face the future with a spirit of optimism. And I think it's very encouraging that the panel discussions today will talk about education and the role of race and how we foreground those things. And we will also be talking about the fashion industry and how we can make it more equitable and socially just. So I would like to say, enjoy the afternoon and welcome again to St. Martin's. And from a personal point of view, FACE reflects my journey as a designer and as an academic. And welcome, it's good to see you all. hand you back to Andrew. And then I'm going to leave you all. So see you all again soon.
There you go, perfect. Okay, so thank you, Darla. Thank you very much. So I'm just gonna talk about a few of the key talks today and a couple of other interventions that may be staged slightly later. Talk about that later. So the first one, the first panel is going to speak about how is education championing new equitable practices. So that's going to be the first talk, which is going to start quite shortly. After that, there's a second panel, which is again talking about how can the fashion industry be reimagined through an equity and anti-oppression lens. So there's a shift of focus this year, slightly away from education and more towards the interface of education and industry, which I think is a really important part of FACE and its journey, and also its evolution. So a lot of the panelists and academics are practicing, have experienced having practiced within the industry, and so some of our experiences are really valuable to pass on to not only students but also other academics in other spaces. So I think that's a really important focus of today's events. There will be a short break between the two panels, and then at 5 o'clock I shall be playing some music for you, so please celebrate. This is supposed to be a celebration. We've all been through quite a lot of trauma, so I think now as we move forward as FACE, this is a kind of a celebratory space. So again, feel free to be involved, ask questions. There will be a chance that Karen's going to introduce around 4:40 to talk. So please make notes, please interact. The panelists are very knowledgeable, as are we all in this room. So it's a two-way discussion. And I think that's the other thing for me to say is this is a conversation. Some of this ground is new. We haven't had these conversations before. We've never seen a panel looking so fly, right? So we've never seen a panel like this before. So I think it's really important that we engage in a two-way conversation. So on that note, I am going to hand over to Davina. And so Davina is going to introduce the panel. And the first question is, how is education championing new equitable practices?
Thank you, Andrew. So can everybody hear me? Yeah. Nice to see you all. So I'm just going to start with introducing the panel and introducing myself. I'm Davina Hawthorne. I'm a fashion and textile designer, activist and educator. I started my career working in the high street as a pan cutter designer, and then worked with my own practice, had my own studio for a number of years in Clerkenwell, London. And yeah, I kind of dipped in and out really of academia as I was practicing. And recently I am now a senior lecturer and programme leader for the MA Fashion and Textile course at De Montfort University. So that's me. And I will go on to Max. So Max Candola, hi Max. Max Candola is an associate professor in photography in Nottingham Trent University. Max has held various positions as course leader and principal lecturer and contributes across MA and PhD. Max exhibits his photography internationally. His work is held in major collections and he has published 4 books. His photographic and pedagogic research is positioned in race, representation, identity and difference. So moving on to the lovely Katie. So Katie, hi. This is Katie Dar. Katie is founder of and former CEO of the pioneering charity Art Against Knives, which she established as one of London's leading youth-led organisations. Renowned for its creative community-led interventions, her work has transformed lives, affected systems change, and influenced national social justice policy. She continues to work in partnership with young people and the creative industry to develop new ways of working, predominantly through her continued involvement with Art Against Knives and as a non-executive director of Milk Honeybees, supporting young black women through creative therapeutic opportunities. So moving on to Saima Nishat. Hi, Saima. So Saima is a designer who is inspired by her Bengali heritage and menswear silhouettes, graduating with a BA Hons in fashion design in July 2023 from Winchester School of Art, which I also studied and taught at Winchester. Nishat's graduate collection, When Are You Coming Home?, features at Graduate Fashion Week 2023, highlights the feeling of never belonging to a specific culture due to her Bengali heritage and British upbringing. Moving on to Duna. Hi, Duna. Duna Sabri. Dr. Sabri is a research fellow at the Centre for Public Policy Research, King's College London. Her research is in the sociology of higher education pedagogy, interdisciplinary education and institutional and national policy relating to HE. Her published work critiques the concept of the student experience and explores HE policy discourses. She is also an associate director of the interdisciplinary education at King's, which encompasses educational development and design and the management of cross-faculty curriculum innovations. Her current interests are in development of interdisciplinary curriculum design, learning and teaching. Hi, Benita. So, Benita Adugu Atkinson. Benita has been in education sector for a number of years, over 30, working in FE and HE as an academic and management roles. Currently a senior lecturer at the University for the Creative Arts, a race equity activist, inclusive curriculum consultant, fashion designer and creative member of the FACE Council, graduate Fashion Foundation academic, trustee and British Fashion Council's committee member. Last but not least, Sharon Lloyd. Co-founder of FACE, Sharon is a senior academic and course leader of MA Makeup and Hair Futures at Solent University. Her interdisciplinary research explores and challenges the relationship between fashion, makeup and body image, and she has been interviewed on these topics by Vogue, Business, the National Museum Scotland, Show Studio and the Female Lead. The focus of Sharon's academic leadership is in the development of inclusivity, engagement and integrity within the production of beauty and identity, and how the approach can lead to race equity within the education. Moving on. Welcome to today's discussion on the topic of equitable policies in art and design education. We aim to explore how education institutions are actively promoting fairness and equality in their practices and where we can take positive steps. Before we begin, let's talk about the concepts of equitable policies and their significance in the realm of education. Equitable policies in education entail providing equal opportunities and removing barriers that hinder and access success for individuals from diverse backgrounds. So the Office of Students, and you can see a slide up there, has recently introduced an equal opportunity risk register, which has 12 risks within it. The register, the objectives are for access and participation plans. To gain comprehensive understanding of this register, I would encourage everyone to have a look if you're not familiar. So higher education providers are expected to base their strategies on credible evidence of significantly moving the volume and quality of evaluations to strengthen their understanding of what works. Moreover, these institutions should include an accessible summary of their plans and collaborate more closely with schools to ensure fair access to higher education. There are disparities in educational outcomes between different ethnic groups. For instance, statistical reports show that in 2021 academic year, there was an 18.5% point gap between the percentage of white students receiving the first and 2-1s and the percentage of black students achieving the same. Similar gaps exist between white students and Asian students, 6.1%, and white students and students of other ethnicities, 9%. And again, you can explore that through advanced HE. So that was kind of a statistic from that report. So with this in mind, we need a call for action. And I would like to take this opportunity to discuss how we can take positive steps to create a more equitable outcome for our students and staff within the education system. So I'm going to turn my attention to our esteemed panellists who will provide insights and perspectives on various aspects related to equitable policies within art and design, and hopefully from your own perspectives. Okay, so let's move on. First question. What is the impact of creating an environment that promotes equity, fosters cultural understanding, and cultivates socially conscious artists and designers? How does this aid the educational experience and success of the university within and beyond? So I'd like to sort of move around the panelists and give some examples of that. I'm going to start by giving one of my own examples. When I have my students in front of me for the first sort of induction week, there's a little slide here, play Tai Selassie TED Talk, and it's what she sort of talks about, the sort of heading of it is, don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I'm local. And she talks about the multilocal. Multilocal, the concept of the multilocal, a person who identifies with and is shaped by a mixture of places, experiences, and cultures. And I think that's really important to talk about with the students. You know, what are their experiences? How are those intersectional cultures mixed in? What's their experiences? And Tai Selassie goes on to talk about the 3 R's, which is about sort of relationships, rituals and restrictions. And she gives the audience a little task to kind of put those into columns. And I think it's really interesting in terms of, you know, how those relationships shape us as people. What are those rituals? How do they kind of mingle? And, you know, we could be like, you know, going for coffee and kind of people that we meet and the cultures that we kind of engage with, I think is interesting experiences. And then the other one is the restrictions. And I think it's really important to get to know your students and sort of be able to then tailor that to their own interests and research. And so I guess I'd like to kind of put this question to a number of you. So I'm going to start with Katie, actually. How do you know, I saw your TED Talk, actually, about, you know, your nail parlor and this kind of idea of trust. Could you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I think my first port of call when I'm thinking about this question is who's creating this environment and who's responsible for it. if I think about the experience of Art Against Knives and the work that they do, first and foremost, when the work started, I was a white woman walking into a community that wasn't mine. So actually, it was not my responsibility to stand there and create the space. It was my responsibility to stand there and enable other people to create the space and set that up in a way that they wanted to. And in order for that to have long-term impact, that's a space that needs to be built, owned, and created by the community and by the people in it. I could maybe give a little bit of an example to bring that to life. So you mentioned the nail bars. So in 2011, I was actually invited onto Dollis Valley Estate by a group of young people who were working there. And they said, listen, we've been working here for a long time. There's loads of young women. We've got the young men, but actually there's young women that we're really concerned about. Would you come and speak with them? And so, yeah, I was happy to go along. But actually, who am I to walk in and be the one that should be having conversations or supporting these young people? They didn't know me. And so actually, we just invested about 9 months in showing up and listening, and there was no agenda. It was about turning up consistently every single week and just being there and listening. And over the course of this period of time, young women were saying, listen, we're fed up. Our estate's been put on the map for negative things like stabbings. We want to change the perception. And this is how we want to do it. We want to set up our own nail bar. And we want to create a space, our own space. And they had a name and a mission and everything. And so very, very quickly, I realized that my role was to get behind them and help them make that happen. Another thing that we heard really loud and clearly was that people come and go. People come and projects start, and the people say they want to come and help us, but it's gone after 8 weeks. And that was another really important thing to hold on to, which is if I am going to be here and I am going to commit to getting behind you, I need to make sure that we can do that and we can invest in you long term and not be that same person that disappears. So that was 2011. Dollis Dolls Nail Bar, which they designed on Dollis Valley Estate in North London, has been open every single week, 48 weeks of the year across term and holidays since 2011. I've actually lost track of how many years that is, but I think it's over a decade. And that space was owned and run by them, and the work that we did was to make it possible for them to lead and thrive and decide and make those decisions. I no longer work full-time at Art Against Knives, but the team there is 60% made up of young people that we met in the early days of Art Against Knives. Elise, who now runs that program, was a young woman I met when she was 13. She was part of that conversation. She's the first generation to have gone to university, and she's now full-time employed running the program herself for new generations of young women. So my point being, if we're thinking about setting up environments that support people, what position are we standing in and how are we helping and how are we making it possible for people to design those own environments and not creating it for them?
Simon, what do you think?
Hello? Okay. I think when it comes to education and when it comes to like when you go into a classroom, the lecturers also need to have like a very open mind and listening to students as well, because I think sometimes students would go in and they would have like a set lecture and then you'd go in and you'd be like try and absorb the information, but there are things that you like as a student of color, like sometimes there weren't always things that I would agree with, or like there were different ways that I would want to learn, but there wasn't really like the facilities there. So I think if we had like a bit more of like more openness and to like get different feedback from different students, I think that would be really helpful as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think with my uni, like I was quite lucky when I did have like discussions or like I felt like I wasn't heard or something, like I would speak to someone about it and then they would try and like facilitate that, but it didn't always happen like quickly. So that was only the downfall of it.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I think from my point of view, I think having been in further education, moving into higher education, there were some very good aspects of FE that I was able to take into HE that actually I feel was part of what created a much more equitable space. And I think it's all very well looking at the access into higher education, how it's done, how it's done. What happens after that is what's important in terms of the experience on the course. And I think what I got from FE was very much about knowing your learners, and that is about also making your students feel they're being seen and heard, and that's really important. It's not good enough to simply say, oh, well, you're in the space now, get on with it. There's more work to be done to ensure that those students are able to have the full experience, to be able to then meet the criteria, etc., that's required for them to achieve. So where we may have the gap in attainment, often that is not to do with the student's ability to learn or to achieve. There are more things involved there, although I think there are people who think actually that's a true reflection of what things are like, and it's not the case. It's really important that from day one those students felt seen and heard, and there are certain units put into, and I'll come on to it later because I think it may come up as, what are the policies at the university I'm in, but it's really important that that initial week especially, students have activities that actually you get to know them, but they also get to know each other as a starting point. And that also then gives you ideas of where you may tweak projects, etc., to make sure you are including all your students. And it's not good enough to say, oh, well, if they want to look at a particular topic, I don't know anything about it, so I'll walk away. If, as a black academic, I have to understand so many different cultures, I think as a white academic, so should you. So it's also about representation. So there's quite a few things I think we're going to delve into. But if you want an equitable space, it has to be worked at. It doesn't arrive.
Dana, I think...
grab that. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say, hello, everyone. My take on this, and we are thinking about our first years coming into higher education. My thing is, why are we tweaking? Darla mentioned that there are 52% of the students here in this one institution are black, brown, minoritized. Why are we adhering to old standards of teaching delivery? Why can't we throw everything out and restart everything all over again? I really don't think that actually amending what we already have is going to actually make major change, meaningful change for the students that are coming into the system today. Now, we're talking about having an equitable approach to our teaching delivery. If we're not prepared to make those changes, not prepared to dig deep and actually change the structure, we're going to find ourselves here in this same space in 10, 15 years, 20 years' time. So my thing is make those changes. And I think that we all owe it to ourselves to actually question what we're delivering to our students today. I really think it's unfair to expect our students to actually bridge that attainment gap if we're not allowing ourselves to make those changes ourselves.
Thanks, Sharon. Dana, can I come to you on that as well, in terms of the causality of your research? I think that would be really good to follow on.
Thank you. So well put, I think. There's so much that we could be doing. I think when we look around and at students' experiences, at our own experiences, there's kind of too much to do. There's such a long to-do list. And I think one of the ways of focusing that down is to think about what it is that would make the most impact for the most students. So if we look at the cohort and what the profile of the cohort is. So and they don't change year on year. You know, our students' cohort changes over time, but really year on year there's an awful lot of consistency. So it is possible to plan and think, what is a relevant curriculum for this group of students here who may be practicing at some point in the UK, but also for students who are ultimately going to be practicing in other parts of the world. What does a curriculum look like that centres the professional expertise that a student practicing in Beijing might need, or that a student practicing in Korea might need, for example? So I think if we're going to attract these students, and if we're going to do well by them, and if we're going to go for, if we're not going to be constantly in the position of how do we decolonise, but rather think, what does a curriculum look like that hasn't had to do that in the first place? Then, you know, I think that's a kind of data-driven approach that we could that we could adopt with some integrity and in a collegial way, because it is the kind of work, I think, that takes many years. It's not a quick win. It's a slow burner of a change process. I think if we're prepared to consult employers about what they want, then really we also need to be consulting students about what they want and the way that they wish to practice in the future.
Because the students themselves, sorry, I'm just going to say that the students themselves, they know what an equitable space looks like. I think that's the problem. We're not actually listening to our students. They're telling us this is what they want and this is what they need. But actually there seems to be a bit of an echo chamber going on, where they're saying all of this stuff and we're cherry picking tiny minutiae out of the data. We're not listening to them. We really need to be much more radical in our approach. And I think that we've got the most amazing opportunity here today to start those active changes within education.
Totally agree. Because
Yeah,
we,
definitely.
the educators, should be the disruptors of all we feel is right.
Yeah, I think it's leading on to the next question, actually. So, you know, how can we ensure that our teaching practices are unbiased, equitable and diverse in content? Again, can we provide some examples? And I think it's that global perspective, isn't it? I think, and being disruptors and actually taking ownership as individuals. Simon, can I come to you on that question?
So when I was at uni, so I'm going to be finishing, well, basically finished now, graduating in a week. One thing I found quite difficult was finding resources. So I kind of wanted to do something that was like a little bit related to my culture, because I'm Bengali. I was born and raised there, and then I moved here when I was about 10 years old. So I didn't really fully embrace my Bengali culture until like probably recently, because I felt like, oh, like it just doesn't, I didn't want to really associate it too much to it, because I didn't want like want to go into uni and just kind of, because I feel like when you come from a different background, you're kind of expected to do something cultural. So I didn't want to lean into it too much, but at the same time I was like, I do want to kind of educate people about Bangladesh, because whenever like they hear it on the news, it might be to do with floods. So I didn't really want like a negative connotation to it, although that is something that happens in the country. I wanted there to be like, I wanted to be more educated on like the architecture and like things like that. And I remember there was a competition, and it was with the British Library, and I asked the question about how I can find resources and artifacts and things like that, or whether they had anything on Bangladesh, and they were like, yeah, we do have it. And then later on, one of my tutors were like, you know, we do have the resources. You can speak to the library, and they can get books and things like that for you from external resources. So I was like, oh, okay, like I didn't know that about that before. So I went to the library and then I looked up some books, but they weren't really ones I wanted to look at. It was just very random. I was like, okay, I'll just pick out some like different art ones and things like that. And a lot of them were like folk art. It wasn't something I was super interested in. So I tried to find some books, and then it came to like the sessions where you'd have to go into uni, and then they would ask you like, where's your research? Like, where are you getting all these ideas from? And then I'll be like, well, my books are coming. So yeah, you have this external resource where you can get all of these library books, but by the time they get to you, it's like, well, 1 month, 2 months, and then you're like in the middle of your project and everybody else has got resources because they've looked at, I don't know, Western designers, and you're like, well, I'm kind of stuck now. So I would have to like then look at other examples that are maybe like close to it, so I can then present something when it came to class. So I think having facilities where you can actually access books and things like that when it is to do with like cultural things, or like even if it's not cultural, like I might have wanted to like look at music, didn't really have any of those books or anything. And if I was to do some research and find something on Google, it just doesn't seem as like, you know how you can look at like academic resources? It's not as, yeah, it doesn't have the same effect as like, oh, I got this from a book. Yeah, exactly. It just seems as not as significant in a way. Yeah. So that's one thing I found that was quite difficult. So did you feel that it hindered you? Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Because I felt like everybody else had the resource because they were looking at things that are a little bit more Western, whereas I wanted to look at my own culture. But then I had like, and then later on when it came to my final collection, I found some pictures of like family photos and things like that I used as reference, because I was like, I can't be going back to looking at other things and waiting for a book to arrive in 3 months when I need it, you know, in a week or something. So I was like, I'll just use that as my resource.
I think it's yeah, about that sort of white lens, isn't it? And but also it's about kind of what you're saying, going back to starting, you know, starting fresh. Like, you know, I think it'd be really good, Max. Actually, 'cause I think you were gonna talk about this a little bit.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to sort of talk about. I talked earlier about pace in a previous conversation about pace and language. I think the pace of how you deliver and the language is very important. I say that because entering the academic environment many years ago, I followed the footsteps of other academics, predominantly white academics, and how they presented and taught. And it took me a few years to take a step back, and I work in industry, I work in the photographic context, working with the Arts Council, the British Council, various organisations, and what you found around the table, there was a level of equality, a pace. One had a consideration of one's background, subject matter, and these conversations were very much embedded within the context of one's culture and background. So it's almost reinventing yourself as an academic to go back, because I was not familiar with that, because I was brought up primarily within a white structure. So what do I do? So it's going back and looking at the environment and trying to change that environment. The university I'm at the moment, and there's myself and I would say 1 or 2 other black, brown academics. And since post-2020, Floyd and lockdown, and also significantly joining FACE, it's sort of introducing the dialogue we have in that sort of area. It's actually looking and discussing it, but it's going back to what Sharon was saying earlier. Looking, reading, doing certain internal sort of diagnostic approaches is not good enough. And they're just numbers, and to some extent I think it's vanity, because when you're talking to other academics, predominantly from a white context, one is naturally going to agree, but it's that detail. You need to unpick the detail. going to the curriculum and looking at that, it's actually when your students are around you, I'm like to think, and with my colleagues, that we offer a curricula, and then we ask, I know what I'm going to do in my third years when I go back. I'm going to present the curriculum and ask them to unpick it. What do they want to do? And also within the context of literature, it's very important that we do our research on contemporary literature that's out there to present a broad, diverse range. On the slide that I've got 2 slides from Nottingham Trent. One of them has a range of about 8, 9 books, from poetry to photography, fashion, documentary, landscape, presented by black, brown photographers. That's on my curricula. That's what I present. And in that same sort of breath, it's opening up a dialogue about one's culture, one's background. What is the space? How do you feel safe in that space? And also, with my white students, it's really interesting asking about culture. Where do you come from? And they're amazed and shocked that I'm interested to ask about, okay, you come from Hull, you come from Brighton. What is it like there? Why do I and other students from a black or brown background have to constantly justify their background? And I think it has to be a very open curricula. And it is going to be very difficult, because 1 or 2 black academics, brown academics cannot do that, but we can make a change. It's how the curricula is taught from year 1, going to year 2, going to year 3. And I think we need to have points of reference where we come in and do checks, house checks about it. I think that's really quite significant.
I think as well, archives, I think, is really important. I do a lot of work with my students regarding archival. And we go and visit the library, we look at the archives, but, you know, who's collecting, what's being collected? Often, you know, there's a missing thread, Andrew. You know, in terms of, you know, what is actually, you know, being archived. So I think that's really important. Can I come back to Benita? I don't know if you have.
Interesting about the archive, because as we know, there is a hierarchical element to that, and there has been, in terms of what gets archived and what doesn't, and that goes to our museums as well anyway. But I think it's really important that when we look at what we're presenting to students, especially, you know, something as simple as doing a PowerPoint presentation, etc., speaking to what Max said, it's really important that all the things going in there are considered. And it isn't just to stick to the same thing you've been delivering year on year on year, because we're in a fast-moving world. So it goes beyond just what we always know we present. You know, where is the relevance of AI and race? Where is the relevance of all of that? So it's really key that there isn't an element of accountability. And I always feel that there needs to be a sort of something that lists the things to consider to go on to briefs, because there are people who don't consider it at all, and they need to. And when we talk about our reading lists, and I object to that term reading lists, it should be a reference list, because that reference should be beyond just books. It should be TED Talks, it should be relevant YouTubes, etc. So we're speaking the language as well of our students, and they're looking at things that will excite them as well. So we need to really, as you're saying, Sharon, throw it all up in the air and really kind of bring it into the 21st century, because we're still relying on education and elements that I had in the 80s as a student. And the world is moving faster than that, but we need to stay on top of it. You know, we've got ChatGPT, all of those things. Where does that feed into what we're talking about? And you may think, oh, in this brave new world, when we're going into AI, race doesn't count. I'm telling you, it's being replicated within it. So we need to really look at everything we're delivering, and there has to be some element of accountability.
I think developing these new technologies as well, definitely through, we have to have that dialogue. Sorry, Dina, would you like to?
Yeah, just sort of springboarding off those points about curricula that have been made. I think it's really important that we link what students experience with academic practice and then with institutional resources and even national policy, because we are all kind of nested within that kind of larger environment, which either encourages us to be subversive and to question our conventions and the way that we're using our resources, or it actually inhibits us and kind of inserts kind of fears and inhibitions into that process of questioning. So I'm thinking about the culture wars and institutional fears of being on the front page of the Daily Mail. So I have librarian colleagues who regularly receive freedom of information requests about the number of books that they have withdrawn or banned or taken away from the library shelves. And there are kind of journalists and others who are looking for evidence that universities are putting away books about anti-racism or about trans issues. So there's a wider environment which either helps us or hinders us. But I think there are kind of two pillars that I would sort of point to as being really important in the experiences that you were talking about, Saima. And the first is about the resources, how we choose to spend our budgets. So coming back to, there will probably be a certain percentage of students who have a background in Bangladesh or a connection to Bangladesh every single year. So that's predictable, really. We shouldn't be having to rely on an ad hoc process that takes months to bring in. So then somebody is making somebody's made a decision about which books related to Bangladesh are going to be included in the collection. Who did they consult when they decided on that particular selection? So there's an issue there about kind of recognition. How important is this area of work? How good are we at recognising its value? So the first thing is about resource, what we choose to spend it on, and the second is about recognition and the extent to which we are qualified to ask the right questions and recognise the significance of the interests that students are bringing to us, particularly when we're claiming that actually much of the work that we ask them to do in a creative arts context is self-directed.
That's a really excellent point, isn't it, in terms of, we know how many Bangladeshi students or the kind of direction in the student body. But also I think there's a question of what's been spent, who's actually spending it, what power is there in there. And also coming back to your point, Saima, about actually being able to request resources, and being able to communicate that to students, but also as academic staff, we have a duty to, to request these things as well. So I think there's a number of factors there that come into play. Going on to the next question. So what are the positive steps we can take to address recruitment-related inequalities? What do you think are the most important issues we face and what actions are required? Shall I come to Sharon?
Oh my gosh, recruitment. At risk of sounding as if I'm repeating myself, employ more black and brown people. There you go. It's really simple. And, as we are looking across, primarily at this point, that educational landscape, what we're looking at, I read something really interesting the other day. When we talk about, very often we talk about women, we talk about the glass ceiling. I thought that was fantastic. because what she then went on to say was that for black, brown and minoritized people, there is a concrete ceiling. You cannot see what you can attain. I mean, I've been having lots of really interesting conversations between lots of the FACE members this week about that concrete ceiling and about not being given the tools to succeed. We're asked, for example, to engage in EDI or DEI, but actually we're not given the tools to actually manifest all those changes. We're just plopped into place and told, there you go, get on with it. And I'm seeing it replicated over and over again in the educational landscape. We're asked to make these changes, but not given the real support that we actually require. And it is no surprise that we're seeing all these DEI, EDI leaders resigning globally. Globally. If they're resigning globally, there is an issue here. There is a problem. And that means that we need to start addressing it now. Not next year or the year after. We need to be panicking. Why aren't those leaders staying in post? And let me say that while these leaders are leaving, who are they being replaced by? Which is the other frustration. Not by other black and brown minoritized leaders, but by white and mainly male leaders. It's really, it behoves me to turn around and say, actually, these companies, these industries are doing a good job. They're failing, and they're failing each and every one of us in turn. So when we look at it in terms of education, and we look at those figures of leaders coming into the industry, well, into education, actually, we're being asked to sort of support these agendas, but not given the tools to do so. I really think that every single new academic that comes in needs to be given a mentor. A mentor to uplift them on and up into their journey, academic journey. And I know that this might seem a little disagreeable to our white colleagues, but actually we also have an attainment gap. We start with a deficit the moment we walk into an institution. We are the lone voices. So we're asking our academic institutions, we should be asking for that support right from the get-go.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. I was having a conversation with Katie actually about mentorship, and I was saying I need a mentor. Yeah. I'm here.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'm sorry for. I'm just going to say it's my opinion. I have been asked to mentor. Last year, I was asked to mentor a really lovely person in my institution. But my problem was that the mentor training that they provided for, the HEA provided, I sat on those mentor training sessions, and I was the lone black face. And I sat there listening to all of these other people, various people from various areas within education, saying, well, we really want to help. And I'm like, you're not helping me. You're not helping me. What you're doing is taking from me, you're taking my agency, you're asking my opinion, and you are going on and up in your career. You are tick boxing. Down with tick boxing, damn it. I'm fed up of tick boxing. Let us actually go out there and actively ask other black academics to support other black and minoritized academics. That's what we should be doing. Oh, absolutely. And I'm down with doing it for free. You know, the last summit I talked about burnout. Burnout is such a real thing. And we want to give, but actually we're asking our academic institutions to support us in doing it and support it fairly and equitably.
Thank you, Sharon. I think that leads on to something I had a conversation with another black academic, and I've actually found out that DMU have partnered with WEN, which is Women's Higher Education Network, and it's a recruit to drive to recruit 100 black women professors in higher education. Coming back to that progression, there are currently just 35 black women professors in universities in the UK, including one at DMU, compared to 12,860 white men with professorships. So, yeah, I mean that because... Yeah. So there are currently just 35 black women professors in universities in the UK, including one at DMU, compared to 12,860 white men with professorships. So I think this is where there's positive action in regards to what DMU are doing. So, you know, they're kind of one of 6 universities to have teamed up with WEN, so that there are more black women can progress to more senior roles in their academic careers. And what's really good about that is the black women coming together, talking through their struggles, and kind of thinking about positive actions going forward. So I think I'm going to apply, and I think it's just something that is needed. Anyway, so I think let's move on to the other question. Have you got 10 minutes? We've got 10. Oh, that's it. Sorry, let's wrap up. We've got 10 minutes. Okay, okay, we've got time for one more question. So can you suggest how universities can facilitate greater progression of black and brown? I think I kind of covered that bit. Black and brown students within education system and beyond. Do you give any examples? I think I'd like to bring this to Katie and Simon. Maybe Simon actually. What are the challenges going forward in terms of industry?
I think one of the main challenges from going from university into like a working field is like actually getting the job. And when you do, it's unpaid. And then whereas like, you know, when you're fresh out of uni, they expect you to get there, do the work for free, and it won't be, and you'll be in for the hours that they will need you for. And if you're traveling from like, I don't know, for example, I have to go from like Basingstoke, and most of the places that I would want to do work for is always in London. And if I come at a certain time, it will like, tickets are very expensive, but they won't really cover that. They just expect you to kind of, you know, because what you're getting out of it is your experience. But at the same time, like if there is a way of, you know, helping the students, or if you say you finished university and then you're looking for a job, which is currently what I'm doing. So when I look at like jobs and like even junior roles, they will look for like 2 years, 3 years experience. And I'm like, well, I have that experience just within uni. So it's not out of uni. And when I want experience, I will have to get it. Well, I would have to do it for free. So I think if there's a way of bridging that gap when you go from university to looking for work, if there is a way of just helping the students a little bit more when it comes to like travel fee, food cost, because especially with like the cost of living is very expensive and not everybody can afford it. So which I'm very much considering still doing it for free, I have to have like a part-time job to kind of facilitate that, you know, how I would get there.
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise how we can collaborate from education into industry, industry into education. There should be a to-in and a fro-in there, and a real dialogue and conversation. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking about that gap, and there is a big gap. And potentially this is something that can also be a government involvement, whether we have something like a graduate apprenticeship so that it's paid for, that bridging time. I think there's more that could be done at governmental level to support that. And that's something that policy-wise I'm going to be taking up, because I'm going very political now, you know, going forward. So there are a few ideas in terms of how do we bridge all of that in terms of students being able to move forward and have an element of paid apprenticeship once they've finished you know, their courses. Because just because you've graduated and then you're thrown out there, that in itself isn't good enough. It's not that support mechanism that the students need. And there are students who can be at home and go into London and they're paid for, and then it's not equitable to all. So we need to kind of really start to be quite particular about the things we need to put in place to support students going forward, especially in art and design.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it's even just getting into education. You know, I know that I wouldn't have necessarily have done my MA if CSM hadn't had this pot of money or whatever it was. I remember I got my fees paid because I couldn't afford to go. And it was the fact that I was doing a part-time MA and the university was paying my fees based on my finances, you know, and I kind of juggled. It was a real juggle. And I see so many students with amazing portfolios, you know, that should really have a place, but they just don't have the finances. Industry, can we support those students? Can we finance them? Can we sponsor them? You know, I think Duna, you were talking about your idea about the train.
I've done a small amount of work looking at just how much students gain from engaging with industry whilst they're doing their degrees, whether that's in a year out or through live projects. And it doesn't just benefit employability outcomes, but also it helps students' attainment. And I think the partnerships between universities and courses and industry are absolutely crucial. And how we conceptualise that is also important. So we need to not be, and I think a lot of universities are good at this now, we need to not be seeing that partnership as universities supplying undergraduates for an industry, but as critical partners with a mission for social justice and for changing the industry. So the industry partner needs to be clued up about that and interested in that, but also on board with the educational mission that is part of the university, because there can be a tension between the commercial imperative and the wish to have competition and to kind of set students' groups against each other, as against the educational imperative, which is about teaching students that a failure in a particular live project isn't a comment about their entire career or about their entire identity, but is just that particular context, and help them interpret those ups and downs, because it is a very competitive industry, in terms of the context, and enable them to get a bit of distance and agency and power in those situations. So I do think that universities have this perhaps slightly underused political and economic power to make a difference in the industries. Straightforward scholarships and apprenticeships, yes, but also an ability to affect kind of policy change and recruitment practices in those industries.
Thank you, Dana. I think, have we got time? I think I'd like to bring it to Katie as well. I think, yeah.
When I hear everybody talk, I think a lot about like the journey and the pathway that young person goes on into employment and where it starts. And I think industry has a role to play from the very beginning. And too often industry still looks at supporting younger, black and brown, marginalised young people on a project basis. And it's still a thing to talk about. It's social media content. It's still part of brand marketing. And that needs to stop. They need to be able to invest long-term in pathways that are sustained for a decade, that allow these young people to move, first of all, through life and be able to sustain an education. So it's that bit of the journey. Then they need to make it possible for them to be able to thrive and sustain in an education environment. And we were having this chat earlier, right? That's about making sure that those who have to work 3 to 4 days a week to be able to, survive in education are supported and have the same capacity and ability to keep up with education. And then it's about thinking about where they're going afterwards. I had this conversation with some colleagues and young people at Art Against Knives. I said I was coming here today, and is there anything that they wanted me to bring? And the first thing that came up in this room of people was like, yo, did you see Pharrell and his new Louis Vuitton show? And everyone was talking about it like, it's so amazing. It's so amazing to see people like me do that and for him to get there. And then another colleague, a black male, said to me, yes, but did you also see? And I said, yeah, I think I know what you're going to say. And he said, when Pharrell walked out onto his runway, did you see that there was no one like me following him when he brought his whole team out onto the runway? And I just wanted to bring that today because I feel like that's the bit that needs to change. We're making moves and we're putting people in and making some changes, but we're not thinking about all of this legacy work. That's where the real term, unsexy, you can't put it on your social media work needs to take place. And so I think that is my call to action, which is like, let's stop worrying about how we're being seen and what we're doing, and let's do the silent work and invest it in the long term.
Okay. I think I've run out of questions. But,
I think it's time for some questions. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that we'll put it as a close, I think. Yeah.
All right, another round of... Okay. Is it working? Hello? Can I, is it working? Okay, it's working, sorry. Okay, so thank you, Davina and the panel. An amazing discussion, as always, to kickstart the Summit 2023. Now, this is the part where I ask the audience. Now, I hope you've been taking notes. I'm sure you've got amazing questions. If we don't have questions in the room, by the power of technology, we don't have any questions from online. So we're going to have to rely on... Okay, a question here. Okay, I'm going to give you the mic. Is that right?
Hello, thank you so much. That was awesome. Just really thought-provoking and inspiring. It's not so much a question, it's more kind of a follow-on from what we were just talking about. And I was just thinking about, my own experience about being a graduate and the journey that I've been on over the last sort of 15 years in the creative industry. And it's only until you look back, sort of post-Floyd, when you start to realise how naive I probably was when I did graduate. And I think it's about... arming your students with the realities of what actually is going on in the industry, because actually being in university can be a bit of a bubble and you are around your peers. And yes, not many people look like me. However, it is a bubble and it was a shock, but I didn't realize until sort of 10 years later how much of a struggle I was experiencing, and that probably had something to do with my race. And so it's about, having those conversations and arming them. I don't know how it works, but sort of giving your students the confidence to actually, it's a bit like what you were saying about sort of tearing up the rule book and sort of starting again. And why do we have to go into industry and fit ourselves into these spaces when we don't particularly fit in them anyway? And it's about kind of building your own space and having the skills and the ability to be able to think in your own box and stay in your own lane and build an industry that makes sense to you and the people that are going to follow you. And I think that's what I think about what would be great.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions or insights or something we missed? Okay, we go.
Hi. Saima, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Saima.
Saima. I think one of the things that educators and students must remember is the reason why you're there and your purpose and being intentional. Now, one of the things that I think is important in our job is that we are problem solvers, first and foremost. Leave the airy-fairy fashion design thing alone, right? Because within your statement, I thought of 3 ideas: Bangladesh, flooding, and immediately I thought, my God, that's a collection about mobile clothes susceptible to changing climates. And somebody else did a collection recently about a new city being built in Seoul. So it's constantly hoovering up, literally hoovering up information and solving that problem of not having what you may perceive to have, because it's your culture. What more do you need to reinforce how your 6 people in your family have lived, right? And I mean, because technology now allows us to have recorded documentation, so that when your great-grandmother or your aunt said, well, we moved from the country, because all of these things could impact. So just remember that, because you can't be hobbled by anything. And you yourself said you were waiting for a book. You're in London. There are the embassies there. You really, and I mean, I remember I did a lot of walking as a student. I spent most of my money on magazines. And you've got to make that sacrifice, and the sacrifice pays off. But remember, first and foremost, we are problem solvers.
Oh, go on, Sharon.
Yes, I absolutely agree. We are problem solvers. But the thing, when I talk about making those changes, and we're talking about decolonization, what we really need to remember is that we're global problem solvers. We are, I was reading my lovely Business of Fashion last week, and I was looking at the figures of what's going to happen across America, Europe, and of course the UK. And that change is on us now. It's not going to happen, it is happening. So unless we are supporting students like Seema, we are going to be falling behind.
But not only that, the entire industry is exhausted of the Western canon of references, right? We had Japanese in the 80s, then in the 90s we went back to that European, Eastern European thing. And the 21st century with globalization, because of course too, what we have in learning institutions now are people from Asia who could afford it. And it's integrating their customs, history, and culture instead of asking them to reference Andy Warhol. There must have been an artist working in China at that time that we reference, but it's something too that has to be, as you were saying, decolonizing the curriculum. But then when we depend on
we've
It's not just books.
hold up. I'm going to intervene. We've got 5 minutes. That right there is a lecture that we need to capture. Yeah? So you're coming to Liverpool to give the lecture. Right. Okay. Go on, Sharon.
My bugbear at the moment is language, okay? And when we're talking about our students, can we, and I absolutely value what you've just said, but can we all stop saying the word foreign? It's international, global. I mean, I'm looking across this audience, and this is our community, so we really need to change that.
And universities want to appear to be global spaces. So if they're going to be global spaces, they need to ensure that within that space are everything that will enable any student from anywhere to thrive. That's it.
Right. I think, have we got time for one more? Okay, we've got time for one more. So the big takeaway there is international. Okay. Pascal.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great discussion. I think what we're talking about here, and what we always talk about is power, okay, and how I think the discussion's been really interesting, who we give power to, whose power we move towards, whose power is then moved away from, and we need to hold that in how we remember education. I think, Casey, what you were saying about Pharrell, we see that as powerful, but we then say who's behind that. LVMH benefit from that, okay? I think we could talk about acculturation, how our culture, how black and brown culture is then made to look like something else. Streetwear was something in the 80s when we were growing up. It's very different now. So is that what we want? Is that what we want to teach? Saima, in terms of yours, and I'm speaking very quickly because I've got a lot to say, but I know we're running out of time. In terms of where we talk about students especially, and we talk about foreign or we talk about international, I think language is really, really important. To quote Audre Lorde, if we're still going to trying to dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, we're going to get nowhere. My role, some of you know, some of you don't, I'm an Associate Vice President for EDI and Social Justice at Southampton University. Very difficult role. But very powerful role. So I want to give power to students and staff. Benita, you talked about people being seen. I think that's really important. For them to be seen, supported and safe, we then have to, as Sharon said, just rip up what we're doing. I think sometimes we forget the strength of our blackness and our brownness and our diversity. Sometimes that is in the language, how we talk about underrepresented students, how we even talk about international. I don't particularly like that word international or international. When we talk about international, we think about black or brown, Chinese, Southeast Asian. We don't think about white or Irish or American or Australian. So what it does, it disempowers. And we think of language being very liberating, but really it can be quite limiting. So how we speak, how we communicate is how we act. And that's all we'll be remembered for, what we did and what we spoke about. So I think when we're having these conversations, wherever you're having these conversations, whether it's in education, at home, with your friends, you'll reveal yourself through the language. And if you're either going to empower someone, then make sure you're listening to them to empower them. Not using transactional language or operational language, use emotional language. Because I don't feel underprivileged. I don't feel disempowered. I'm a powerful black man who's working at a high level at the university to make sure I can empower the people that come behind me. So I want to thank the panel, thank FACE, because they continue to do good work. So everybody that's in this room, applaud yourself as well, because these are where action is the conversation. So thank you.
All right, I think Pascal, who is, if you don't know, one of the co-founders of FACE and not a plant, okay, so he is legit. I think he summarized that brilliantly. The next discussion is going to probably take in some of those conversations around equity within the industry. So I think that Pharrell moment will probably be picked apart in panel number 2 as well. Right now, we have the opportunity for a recess and a toilet break. So if you would like to exit, you've got 10 minutes. So you must be back in the room in 10 minutes' time. Thank you. You good to go? Right. Okay, for sure. Okay. If we could take our seats. We are about to get into round 2. Is everybody ready? Okay, great, brilliant. Welcome back. I need my glasses. Okay, so welcome back. As you can see, we've had a panel overhaul and some new faces have appeared, which is fantastic. Assia is going to introduce us to the panel in a bit. There's a change of gear here. I think we've had a conversation around education this morning, directly to do with universities and equitable practice. And now we are going to talk about the industry and how education and industry can start to think about how they can work together, again, around this question of equality and equity. There is a difference between the words. We prefer equity now, I think, as a term. And so that's another discussion. So I am going to introduce you firstly to Assia, actually, who's going to chair the panel. So Assia Jirani McCann has a career of almost 30 years within the international luxury and fashion marketing. Don't laugh. Yeah, at directorial level, providing direct experience to accelerate and apply into academia. So I think this is really important to note with fashion education in particular, and the arts. There's a lot of conversation back and forth between academia and industry practice. Talking about equity and talking about our place in the industry from education, we mustn't forget that the world of the industry is changing. So actually, one of the things that education needs to do is keep pace. So the changing world of fashion needs to be reflected in our curriculum. So that's the first thing to say. And so this industry panel has the expertise for us to learn from. Okay, Assia is also a creative business strategist with insight for defining and directing the vision of global luxury brands. So if you think about brands like Vivienne Westwood, Donna Karan, Swarovski, so Assia's done that. She's a founder of FIF, which is the Fashion Industry Forum, a bridge between academia and industry of fashion. So I think this is where this conversation becomes really alive and important. So what do we do after education? What do we do after fashion education? And how does education contribute to a modern fashion industry? So how does education reflect the new changing world of our fashion industry? She's also the curator of 90s from the 90s, which is a personal archive of 90s luxury designer pieces. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Assia, and she's going to introduce this wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you all for being here this afternoon. Such an honour to have you here, and an incredible, phenomenal honour to have this panel that we have here. So let's start with you, Nada. UK-based, but you've travelled the globe getting here. You call yourself an Egyptian disruptor. So you've a researcher as well, an academic, and you have your own foundation, collective. And within that is almost like an international agency based at African designers and creatives. You're at Cardiff Uni at the present?
Cardiff Met.
Yeah, we can all have
Cardiff Met. There's them at the back.
And you've got 7 years of lecturing behind you?
Yeah.
You're still in it?
Yes, I still am.
Yeah,
yes.
but you straddle, yeah?
Yes.
So you're straddling this whole thing. You've got your collective as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've got to read this line out because there was a line about your the streetness of it all.
Oh yeah, please go ahead. I
It's
can't remember what I
not
wrote.
here though. It's not here. It's gone.
Do you want me just? I'm an academic. I'm also a disruptor, if you will. I'm very active and vocal about certain issues, especially pertaining to North Africa and decolonising and equity and creating a more global sphere for us as academics and our up-and-coming graduates and designers, and creating our own table separate to that of the Western canon. And I think that kind of summarises it.
Absolutely. Thank you. But there's a lot more to it. We're going to hear that. And we have Daniel.
Okay. Hi.
Hello, Daniel Peters. And you're such a prominent vision. You're everywhere at the moment. I mean, everywhere in the British Fashion Council. You've got your own brand specialist brand, which you launched in 2020.
Sort of. I mean, the pandemic happened, so it didn't really happen. Instead, I launched kind of Fashion Minority Report, but it's there.
Yeah. And that is, you're running it from Peckham, London, South London boy. But it's mentoring. We've talked about education and mentoring systems and we're looking for all the time. Well, Daniel's gone ahead and created one himself. You've worked with phenomenal companies within that. You've just done something with ASOS, Burberry, list a few. I don't know if you can list a few more.
I was like, do I know them? Yeah, I mean, we do stuff in the industry to create change for underrepresented voices because, to be fair, the fashion industry is a bit shit. Probably not supposed to swear at these things. I love the fashion industry, but the reality is it's been rife for not supporting underrepresented. God, am I drunk? I'm not.
No,
I'm
not
not.
yet.
Underrepresented talent from minority or marginalized groups. And actually one of our mentees, or our current mentees, is in the audience.
Hey, bravo.
And the British Fashion Council are in the audience and their partners. And we get to do incredible work that supports emerging and sometimes established talent with the support of leading industry brands and businesses. I'm very fortunate to be in a position to have a company that turned 3 years old the other day.
Purposeful, incredibly purposeful, incredible. Well done. Thank you for being here. And Kristen.
Hello.
Hello. And I love your background because you have an education in fashion and textiles. And if you want to explain where you got that and where you are now, because that's even more interesting as well.
Okay, so I studied fashion and textiles at Grey School of Art in Aberdeen, and then I went on to do my master's at Edinburgh. After that, I was able to get an opportunity working at Good Omens 2 as a costume trainee, and ever since then, I've been working my way through the film industry, just ticking along and just trying to keep being creative if I can in other different industries as well. I love fashion, I love to do art as well, so yeah, try and be an all-rounder, so to say.
I love the fact as a student you show fashion students there's not just one route, there are so many routes to take your degree, and we just, when we're in education sometimes, we just think that there are incredible heroes and heroines up there that we want to be like in fashion, but costume design plays such an incredible role in pushing fashion. It's another, and also you've had an exhibition?
Yes, I've recently had a wee exhibition in Japan, which I couldn't go to, unfortunately, and sometime in the near future, I'll be doing one in Chile.
Amazing, amazing. And when did you graduate again?
I graduated my BA in 2018, and I graduated my master's in 2021.
Brilliant. So not so long ago, and you've achieved so much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Trey.
Yes, hello.
Oh my God, what a journey.
Absolutely.
Trey, you've come, we've adopted you here, like all of us have been adopted as a minoritized community here. You've come all the way from Australia.
Yes, I have indeed.
An artist, an agent, your art being in a creative form, styling and photography, I'd say.
Styling, photography, casting. I would say that's mainly the three things that I do the most, creative direction.
You have opened things that should have opened for me as a brown person in fashion 25 years ago. It should have happened then. But what you're doing now, visionary, through your lens, through your vision, through your eye, thank you so much. We have much to be grateful for. And we're going to probably show a couple of your images are going to come on the screen. They'll roll past. So thank you again for making that journey. Thank you for coming to England.
Of course, thank you for inviting me.
What do you feel about being here compared to Australia?
Well, I arrived here when I was the ripe age of 20 years old. I had just finished my photo imaging course at RMIT in Melbourne, and I had realized that my dad was actually born here and I was half British without knowing. And then within 2 months, I got my passport and then made the journey over here. I had never actually visited this country and never been to Europe. And somehow
up there at the moment.
yeah, that's one of my girls. Somehow I convinced my South Asian mum to let me do that, and I was able to come here, and it was, I mean, my experience of London was so welcoming. I felt so at home as a mixed race person growing up in Australia. I always felt very outcast and very odd, and didn't really know where I fit, and yeah, so I felt really at home here because I feel like it was a place where you could come and you could be yourself, and I could change if I wanted to every day, my style, my look, who I was hanging out with.
Today.
I'm blonde today. I was a brunette like a week ago. Next week maybe another color. Let's see. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing your talents here.
Of course, thank you.
Anita, my goddess Anita, thank you so much. Again, what you've created, you've come from New Zealand.
Yeah.
What is it about the other side of the world? It's like Star Trek out there. They're so beautiful.
I think this is something about this side of the world. We're all just venturing over.
Oh, well, you come here. You're the creative director. You're a consultant, cultural consultant. I'd say artistically, fashion direction, luxury direction as well. And the portal that's moved everyone that you created has been Diet Prata. So. Do you want to talk a little bit about your journey here as well?
Yeah, of course. Well, I came over in, oh my gosh, I think it was 2018 from New Zealand. I used to work in advertising, and I was working away, and I really was so inspired by, I guess that, like, how diverse London was, as kind of cringe as it sounds. I know these are, like, very bait words, but I'm from New Zealand. There's 5 million people there. I don't even know how many people there are in London, but like a shitload more. And like South Asian people are the second largest ethnic demographic here after British white. So I felt like unity in numbers, and I felt so inspired, and I was like, wow, there are so many of us, and you know that saying safety in numbers, and I really started to reclaim my heritage, and I really started to, I guess, I started this archive of images, just saving stuff on Instagram, South Asian people doing stuff outside of a stereotype, South Asian people in fashion shoots, South Asian people that are illustrators, South Asian people who are models, South Asian people who are actors. Anything that didn't really pander to a white gaze. No chilies, no mangoes, no holy powder, no traditional clothing. Do you know what I mean? And just brown people being really good at what they do. And so I started collating that, and it kind of started gaining traction around 2020. And since then, we have kind of inadvertently become the home of the best in South Asian creativity and talent.
Absolutely.
And we've had some incredible partners, Byredo, Gucci, curated an issue of Vogue,
Indian
Burberry.
Burberry.
We just did a campaign with Johnny Walker and Simone Ashley, and many. I mean, there's so many.
So
so
when
much
you
more.
creatively direct, there's a vast array of different brands that you work with. You know,
For sure,
again,
but all the opportunities go directly back to the community.
Yeah.
So it feels like a really
these are
special
some of
place.
we lost it. It was just there.
Oh,
Some of your images are coming on the screen all the time.
Oh, yeah,
Just
of
keep
course.
it on roll.
Keep an
But
eye
you
out.
have really broke boundaries. You've visually, I believe, not only in the narrative that you send out on Diet Prata, but visually you've done things again that have never been seen before by a brown person. So thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. But I must say, like, it is a community effort. Like, if there were no stories to tell, there would be nothing to show. So, I appreciate it.
Oh, Deborah, girl, we've been around a long time. But we're still here and still doing it and still got a lot to give. Deborah, you're the creative director on luxury, sustainable, modest wear brand Sabira, and that's how I met you. That's your, let's come straight on the right moment. That's the brand first show, yeah?
Yeah.
And how did you come about going there, that journey to get to there? Because you were styling for many years before then.
Yeah, so my story is I have a degree from London College of Fashion and moved to Italy straight after my degree. Lived there for 4 years, came back to London and really got into a lot of styling. Did a lot of styling work. I also became the UK corresponding editor for Elle Italy. And so I was very much within the industry. At that time, also being a Muslim woman, I just found it very, very difficult for many years to find clothes which were highly fashionable, well-made, but actually met my modest requirements. So it took me a really long time to kind of get to Sabira, but I did a lot of things. I've done jewellery design, I've done print design, I've done many different things, and I think that Sabira is really like a culmination of all of the things that I've learnt throughout those years. And so, yeah, we launched in February 2020 at London Fashion Week, so just before COVID hit, which was great.
Yeah. We did a little showroom, didn't we?
We did a showroom.
Well,
so we've been really good at just kind of carrying on, beavering on, and I've had that tenacity to kind of go ahead and keep it going, really.
And you're lecturing as well, so you sit.
Yes.
You also sit on that side of the
Yes, yes.
fence, as we call it. Okay, so to kick off, the question is, how does the fashion industry reimagine through equity and anti-oppression lens? Going back to what FACE is about, and our wonderful founders created these 4 pillars: power, position, privilege, and purpose. Let's roll through those points and bring them to this talk that we're doing. Equity and the current standing within the fashion industry. It's an open floor here, but a lot of you work within agencies, a lot of you work with clients. You've all mentioned that. Let's talk about collaborations and partnerships. How do you feel, and I'll pose this to you too, Anita, if you like, just put you on the spot. How do you feel, what is the current real value of the minoritized creative within this industry at present?
Like, do you think we're paid fairly? Is that the question?
Yeah, well, maybe let's talk about money. Yeah, because we talked about money, didn't we, earlier?
The value is immense, right? Like, we need to see a truer reflection of society.
What's the value again? Did we say it was like something like $2 trillion? The black pound dollar is worth. Sorry, the monetary value.
Oh, well, I mean, absolutely. Like, the power in minorities is crazy, and the amount of brands that are not speaking directly to oppressed people is absolutely crazy. I mean, I can't speak to the black pound, but I've seen, like, the result. What did you say it was? Like, something trillion?
Yeah, 2 trillion.
2 trillion that the
That's
black
a lot
pound
of
is
zeros.
like. So, like, everyone knows what the black pound is. Yeah. Everyone knows what the black pound is, right?
Pardon?
Like, I was just saying,
Yes.
everyone knows what it is. But I just think, just back to what I was saying earlier, with the South Asian demographic being the second largest in this country, and nobody specifically speaking to South Asian people in a way that resonates with the culture, that is a massive, market that is being missed. And so I feel like there is, similarly to the black pound, there is extreme value in it. It's just who is actually doing it.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And you've had reports on this as well, Daniel. You've worked on reports with your collaborating companies when you've dissected their value, and you help them, don't you, to reach. I mean, let's talk about the positives. There are companies that want to reach to that value.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, yes, there's the consumer, but I typically like to look behind the scenes and actually consider who are the people in positions, not just of power, but actually executing the work. And I think that we are creating more equity, generally speaking. Are we there yet? No, because we're kind of only in some ways 3 years into this journey since 2020, when the conversation erupted around ethnicity, but also just marginalized identities in general. And so I think that we've got a long way for us to all feel as if we've got an equal piece or share of the pie in so many ways. So for us, with what we do at Fashion Minority Report, we do try to work with companies to bring in mentees in different ways, so actually they get to have, I hate the saying a seat at the table because it's rubbish, but like to actually be in those offices. You know, when I joined Burberry at 19, you know, and I was skipping around in a bow tie and skinny jeans, like some weird Bojangles character. But you know, I was one of the youngest people there at 19 for a long time, and I was probably one of the blackest people there for a long time. But you know, I wasn't necessarily given equity whilst I worked at Burberry. So actually now, by bringing in our mentees into different companies such as ASOS or Fred Perry or Farfetch, it's great because they're now getting to be in the rooms and helping to make decisions, and they're now getting full-time jobs because of part of what we do, but also because they're just generally awesome and they should have the opportunity to have equity.
Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work on that. It's just right, isn't it? Power, though, together, this level, what you're creating, Daniel, is going to be the future, hopefully. But at the top, where we are now, let's be controversial, I know we've all got lots to say about this subject. We all talked about Pharrell in this show, and we talked about, and we can all take this subject further if you like, but where does he stand? How do you feel he stands, Deborah, at Louis Vuitton? He comes out, he's creative director, but the team that stands controlling him almost, and I'm talking his monetary value, his execution. I've just come back from Paris, French. It's a French family.
So, I mean, when Pharrell got the appointment at Louis Vuitton, I have to say, this might sound controversial, but I was a little bit disappointed initially because I felt that it would have been great to have acknowledged other people who were minorities. Female as well would have been amazing. Yep. We have not seen that yet. And so, but I do think actually, I completely understand why he was chosen, and I think he did an amazing job. But it was incredibly disappointing when you did see the team that followed him out on the catwalk. And that was the first thing, I mean, obviously I'm going to be looking at that. And that was the first thing I was just kind of like, where are we? You know, and that was really disappointing because I would have hoped and felt that, you know, because I do think that Virgil had a lot more.
Yes. Yeah.
But I would have hoped that, you know, he would have felt the need to continue. You know, to continue that and bring some more on board.
I think the power when you go into those huge houses and sit in Kering and LVMH and so forth, you don't see one person. I don't see one person when I go there at all.
But he has immense power there.
Yeah.
I mean, look at who he brought to the table. Look who he brought to the front row. Absolutely. Yeah. It would be amazing to see him doing that with his teams as well. Or maybe he has them in other sections. I don't know. But what we saw, for me, I was disappointed with that.
But it comes from top down. You know, it comes from the owners down.
Do you think so, though, with regards to him bringing on board his team? I would have thought that he would have had some power there.
I don't think he'd bring in a team because he doesn't... Oh, thanks. I don't feel like he's going to bring in a team because he's not exactly developed a luxury fashion house before, so he's not going to have a team to bring in. The bigger problem for me with Pharrell's appointment in general is that actually, and this will sound incredibly controversial, but why does it always need to be a black man that's brought into the houses? There are other ethnic minority groups who are being overlooked to step into those positions, whether you're Asian, you know, obviously there are varying identities within the Asian community, but it's like there are so many different people that could step into that role. And I think, again, looking at gender, that was a big thing. Like, put Grace Wales Bonner into that position, she'll kill it. But like putting Pharrell, he's there because of hype and hit. And what he did fine, I'll take my hat off to an extent, but don't really care. Like, it's going to last a couple of years, and then hopefully somebody else will come in and do a better job. But also there's just this high turnover and frequency in our industry of creative directors. We saw what happened at Bally. We've seen what happened at Ander Millermeister. You know, all of these people have been kicked out. I think the bigger question is, how does it affect the talent that we're putting into higher education, encouraging to come and study at these institutions, especially international students who pay a much higher rate? Actually, what does it show to you about what success can look like? That you've got to be a hype or a hitman to actually be the person that gets the job. You've got to be that person there. If not, then actually, where are you going to end up? There aren't enough jobs as it stands within the fashion industry for the amount of students that we churn out. Yes. And actually we're waving flags and saying, come here and study because we're awesome. That's great. But actually, well, where are they going to take themselves? And where does it take them when they become disheartened by the industry? Especially when we layer on top of that the marginalized backgrounds that people come from and lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
And also, we are setting, there's a standard in the industry of, like you said, it's a hype man, it's someone in power, but it's someone that is palatable to a Western audience. It is someone that is palatable to a white audience. It's someone that is recognizable to that audience in terms of, oh yeah, we know Pharrell, like yeah, we'll take him. And it's that tokenism that is attached to him, but also attached to us. And I go back, I'm sorry, I've gone back to you skipping around Burberry in a in a bow tie. But that I was there a lot, you know, a while back, way before, you know, in terms of in those spaces with people like Ralph Lauren and people, you know, all these kind of big designer names, and you're grateful to be there. And I felt that I was so happy to be in this space. I was like blessed. I was privileged to be in that space, whereas everyone else around me did not feel that level of gratitude being there, which comes back to the value we give ourselves as global majority and the value we give ourselves in other regions of the world. And we devalue ourselves and therefore allow the industry to devalue us and allow the industry to treat us inequitably. You know, when I go back to my collective members in North Africa, or even my students, I've taught in Egypt and Algeria, and, you know, they automatically come up to me and ask me, oh, what are you wearing? Is that Vivienne Westwood? Is that, you know? And I'm like, no, it's a local brand. But because they don't give value to themselves and they undersell themselves, and it's almost become an expected part of our industry that, well, you know, they should be grateful to be here. So we need to start again from education, explain to them their value is not just tokenism and their value is not just within their cultural context. It is beyond that. And then the industry can give them value when you give yourself value. Yeah.
That's actually something that I struggle with a lot. When it comes to brands, like it's like I was saying before, when it comes to these kind of stereotypical tropes, the food, the clothing, the monuments, the music, the sounds, the colours, it's almost like our worth is so tied to that. It's tied to being topically relevant, or it's tied to being, you know, these stereotypes that are placed upon us. And I've just, actually I'm going to reframe this in case I get sued again, but
Most of us have been sued here.
No, but it is really hard to fight those battles at the top. And I think the way it needs to be shifted is, I mean, I think like the way anything needs to be shifted is like more top heavy down, right? But we can't reach those levels. That's the issue.
I think like with Pharrell, yes, he is a black man in fashion at the head of a house producing a collection with a white filter, because obviously everything does have to get passed, you know, through.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that with a white filter.
I think as much as we look at it for the negatives, there's also a lot of positives, I think, with Pharrell's appointment. And although as I am an artist myself, I really do value the work that artists put in to get to where they need to be. And I do value education as well. However, I do think that, you know, he is, even though he is not, you know, coming from a fashion background, I think his appointment was quite important and quite necessary. And I think also to fill the shoes of someone as big as Virgil, who had the message of love throughout everything, which I think is it's a very simple message in everything that they do and everything, and even the people they brought in. I think, it would have been so nice to see people, definitely see more color in the team that he brought out at the end. But I do think it's a step-by-step process, and dealing with big brands and dealing with these old structures that have been around for so long, and people that have been, in the industry for so long, and all of them being white, I think we're getting there. Definitely we want to be there faster. But I think we're definitely, on the way to have.
I think we are getting a position that I've never seen before, and I never saw it at all, back in the early 90s at all. But when I go now, there's people like yourselves I've never saw that before, ever.
Exactly.
And in numbers, which is great. I think the position needs to be there, but I think we're covering position because that was our second P, and we've covered it through power. And this sits so finely together, power and position, because once you've got that power and you recognize your own power, like Nada says, the position's open. You've got teams. Tomorrow we're working on a team together. And, you created that team. I don't think there's one white person in our team, is there?
Maybe a couple, yeah. But I mean, naturally that happens all the time.
Yeah, that's natural. We turned...
Opposed to that, to be completely honest. One thing that I also struggle with in my business is giving. Okay, so I started Diet Prata. When the opportunities come in, I want to give them to South Asian people. Yeah. But sometimes people, nobody should be getting a role based on their race, right? If we are talking about equality, and if you want a certain level of output, I've kind of shot myself in the foot, for lack of a better term, in trying to find specifically South Asian people to give opportunities to who aren't necessarily ready to receive the opportunity. And that just comes with, I saw you nodding your head, but I think that is a bit of a struggle that comes with trying to rebalance the landscape. But I guess that's where mentoring comes in, how we can kind of, start to...
Yeah, sorry. And also, that brings back that cultural, tokenism role, in that you kind of feel obligated to take up this very specific niche kind of role. And when you don't take up anything that associates with your culture or your background or your locality or any of this, there's this weight on you that, like you said, when you're hiring people, you feel obliged to hire certain people. And it's not about that. Not everyone that's South Asian, like you said, wants to embrace the mangoes and the chilies, and that's okay. Not everyone that's North African wants to wear a galabiya or that's the thing. And we get students sometimes that fall in this really weird position for them, in that they don't want to do anything to do with their culture, yet they feel the only way they're going to succeed in that tiny little space that is carved for them is referencing their culture. And that is what then decolonizing is about, is that how do we embrace both worlds, and how do we create that unity and allyship? And it's not then just this race separate to this race to this race, it's all of it, that unity, and recreating it.
I think it's really important, actually. So with my brand Sabira, it's really important to me that actually when I'm looking for talent for any of the projects that I do, that I'm literally just looking for the talent. I'm really only interested in whether the person is going to be able to deliver, and whether they can deliver it properly, and whether they have the creativity that I'm looking for, irrespective of what colour you might be. There are certain things, there are certain areas where maybe you will be more inclined to choose somebody who's of colour, especially to do maybe models' hair and stuff like that. That's a whole discussion in itself. But, that's one of the things that I actually, really pride myself on, is that, I really think it's important to think about the creativity and how hard the person works and how aligned they are with what I'm actually thinking and believing, and that's who I hire.
These positions that once we have the power, I think the positions that are open, it's a knock-on effect. I really believe what's happening with all of the work that you're all doing, it's a knock-on effect. I've never seen change like this, to somebody who's sitting in the industry 30 years. It's every little aspect that you do is creating this. I love, Kristen, that you talked about something I'd never even heard of, and it was a Black Costume Network, and it's positioning themselves within costume design, in particular for that. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I think that's so specific, positioning ourselves within that arena.
Yeah, so I'd love to talk about the Black Costume Network for a little bit, because I think it's a really good example of an organisation that is creating opportunities for Black and mixed race creatives. And for a little brief history, the Black Costume Network was founded by Jodie Simone Howe and co-founded by Rihanna Charles, and it started in 2020 during lockdown. And it was in response to the heart-wrenching incident with George Floyd. And it started originally as a way for people to talk about their emotions and their frustrations within the industry, but it was also a way to celebrate each other. And now the goals of the Black Costume Network are really to uplift Black and mixed race costume professionals by creating supportive and safe workspaces, as well as creating more job opportunities. For instance, how I became a member of the Black costume community was on my very first production. Someone got me in contact with a costume designer called Carol Fraser, and I can't stress how helpful and supportive she was at the very, very start of my career in mentoring me to a certain degree, and just opening the doors and introducing me to the network. And how the Black Costume Network sort of communicates with each other is through a group chat where we all celebrate each other and ask questions. This typically happens through, someone would, a show will come out that someone's worked on, and we'll all congratulate them and give them their flowers. And it's really important to have a space that's people who are starting their career can easily approach people who have more experience and be able to confidently and at ease ask questions. Is this okay? Is this normal? And stuff like that. So,
yeah,
I think
once you've got that power, when you've got that positioning, the privilege of being able to open it to others. And again, all of you, Anita, Daniel, all of you, every single one of you, it's that mentoring. Like, we come back to that, we come back to education. Mentoring is the key, as much as we can do as a stepping stone between academia and the real world, as we call it, for free-falling. Anis, your mentoring project, it's not just a project, it's a real business. It's been going now for about 3 years, is it?
No, the mentoring has just been around for, I think, coming up a year.
Oh, right.
But I think just as important as, so basically we pair South Asian to South Asian mentoring with like really senior people in the field to people who are, to be honest, it's like really established people. It's people who are just coming into the industry. It's midweights. The mentors pick who is appropriate for them because they're giving up their time. And I think the program is important because half of our parents, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, don't even know what we do for a living. So it's just can like kind of feel, the creative industry can feel like a bit of a lonely place for South Asian people, but also for marginalised communities. So it's been incredible, and it's so nice to have the support of all these really senior people giving their time up for free. But I think alongside mentoring, like, yes, that is an answer, but like networking is a great one as well. Like, I wish, again, coming back to New Zealand, I wish I had all these events to go to. We didn't have that sort of stuff. We didn't have people that were like doing stuff on an international scale. Like, did you feel the same way in Australia, Joe? So, that's why I started it, because I didn't have it.
Yeah. Well, we had this. It's an explosion that's happened recently. You'd say that, Deborah. You were on a scheme.
Since having Sabir, I've actually had quite a few mentors, and so I don't actually think that mentoring is just between education or whatever. I think that actually it's kind of a lifelong thing. It's invaluable to always, have people around you that you can soundboard things off, that you can, communicate with, people who've got experience in different areas and different fields, and can actually just provide some sort of support. And I've really taken advantage of these opportunities. So I'm part of Kenya Hunt's room, so that's why I put up the L piece, which was there, which was kind of like, you know, because I felt that going to, and David's part of that as well. And when I went to the first in real life event that we went to, I said, this is the first time that I have felt so much love. You know, I've been in this industry for years, and I have never felt that kind of community before, and it really touched me.
Yeah.
And I completely understood that there's something that had been missing from my career, from my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know it.
Absolutely. I think that's what we in this room who are members of FACE felt as soon as we got online, no? That love that we had, and that just that sharing of voice that we had never, ever experienced before. So
and
it is
you
community.
realise there's so many people who are like going through the same things as you, and it's like, oh my God, I've been suffering.
Yeah, like
yeah, like the last summit we had, it was a really humbling experience, but also it's that feeling of belonging. You just feel like a warm hug. That's the best way to put it. But it was seeing people you'd been talking to on such an intimate, kind of deep level in person, and like giving them that hug. And I you know, it brought tears to my eyes. It really did. As cheesy as that sounds, but it's that belonging. It's that having your tribe and your people and being in that safe space. I think I agree with you. Yeah.
I think that lonely place that Anita talked about in our industry, and generally in fashion, it is a lonely place because people, oh, you work in fashion, what do you do? And it's really hard to explain when you're running around the world on your own, and we've all done this with our bags and collections and representing. How do you explain that? You know, it's really, I remember I found it really hard in the early 90s, telling Asian families when I went home back to Bradford, what do you do? And I'm like, obviously, you're a loser, you're not a doctor, you're not a dentist. What is it you do? And then and they dress up. And then this woman, I work with this woman called Vivienne Westwood, and she pops up on the screen. It's like, oh my God, you know, she swears on TV. Oh my God. So yeah, your parents are also. You work for somebody that swears on TV, yeah. But it's a lonely place. And then when you then get together in these networkings to realise, you know, you're not the only one. You're not the only, firstly, brown, black, coloured person in the room, but person of colour in the room. But you are then in this industry, which is very specific, very niche. So this privilege of networking, this privilege of mentoring that you've all brought forward is our P at FACE. And out of that, I believe, comes our last P, which is our purpose. The purpose of FACE, the purpose of being together here today. And you got that purpose, I think. I'm going to say that, Nada, because what you've done is really stuck your neck out with the Fashion Liberation Collective. You really have brought together a purposeful place that didn't exist before.
Thanks, that's giving me a lot of credit. I think it's, purpose. I started this collective out of a necessity when I was trying to, you know, amplify a region's voice, you know, that region of North Africa and beyond, being Egyptian and having Turkish blood, Sudanese blood as well. It put me in a weird position in that we constantly get asked, like, what are you? Just like, oh, you're Arab, oh, you're African, or like, what? It usually comes back to, no, it's just Egyptian. Like, there's no, like, it's not that deep. But it came out of that, and the purpose was we need to represent ourselves. And I agree with you on someone here said about that rubbish about we need a seat at the table. No, we need our own table, a bigger table, a more powerful table, because the Western canon and table have been taking inspiration from us as an industry, using our symbology, using our textiles, our weaving techniques. The list goes on and on and on. And then being in those spaces in a Western context, working for couture designers, working for any kind of market, and seeing pictures plastered on the wall from Egypt and from Algeria and from Palestine and from, you know, and from Kenya and Ghana and Nigeria, and having no context with what they were, was the purpose that I created the collective to make a change that is visible and to have credit given where it's owed, basically. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nada. Thank you. And Daniel, I definitely believe in your purpose in your project, and I feel every day, every time I open the IG when it's not been, when I've not been hacked or something, but I just see the work that you do daily, you know, and that is so inspirational. Again, so I think you found your purpose there finally after working in companies, international companies. Do you?
I mean, I thought my purpose was to be Beyonce. First Beyonce
right.
reference of the day. What? It's not. It does. If I don't mention Beyonce in a day, then it's a bad day. It's going to be that person. I take myself seriously, and what I do seriously. It's also not just me, because I have a small team of people who enable me to be able to do what I and what we do on a daily basis. The fact that we're 3 years old and that we're able to support people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people who are ethnic minority or majority, people who may be disabled, people from the LGBT community, like a big thing from the beginning was that we don't just focus on one lens of diversity, because actually for me, if we do that, we're creating even bigger silos. We need to look at them in tandem, because we all carry intersectionality. You know, I've got so many layers that make me who I am, including Beyonce. But all of those layers should be celebrated. And I think looking around the room, there's a rich mix of people. And the fact that we get to do things that benefit and support people from the age of 14 and upwards is incredible. And I love what I get to do. It's bloody dope.
Bloody purposeful.
Yes, like it's massively purposeful, and the word privilege for me is a big one, because I only kind of started this because I realized that I've got what I call professional privilege, and for me, professional privilege is that in my now 17-year career, I've been able to work at great businesses and brands such as Burberry and names, whatever. But like, actually, how can I use those to leverage an experience for people from underrepresented communities? So that was my power. Oh, sorry, not my power, my privilege in that sense, because we all have privilege. Yeah. I'm a man, I'm able-bodied, I'm gorgeous, like all of these different things. Like all of those things, I'm joking, I jest, sorry. But all of those things are my privilege in that sense. And actually, it's for us to all understand what our privilege is, and actually how can we use it individually to create more equal spaces or equity for people who are underrepresented. And actually, if we don't realize that as a community, then we're fucking things up.
Yeah, we are fucking things up. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on. I do need to pass it to Trey for a second, sorry, because when we talk about purposefulness, and we talk about this intersectionality, what you are doing is just even blowing it even further, yeah? We call them your girls. But that's another level that I want to talk about here with you, through you, and how you are doing that, supporting that, pushing it out there in the fashion world. Please have your moment to, it's your privilege to talk about those people, those humans now.
I think it kind of, it's a blend of everything we've spoken about, you know, even like the privilege that I have as, you know, a 32-year-old mixed race creative to now be a mentor and an agency director and to lead the next generation of artists into the future and to select and curate my artistic board and my family, which they're like literally my children, as I call them. So it feels like that is a privilege for sure for me, but it came out of, like, I feel like this was the only option for me, you know, there was nothing else that I tried to fit into another agency as a creative, didn't really work. It was a bit too it was a bit too formal, and the way that I was treated, it didn't feel necessarily right. And also the people that are agency directors or work for agencies typically aren't creative. And I don't think moving
it's a money
forward,
game.
yeah, it's a money game. Like, they're business minded. You know, you are a product, and you go out there and you work, and you produce a product. So you take an image or you style an image, and then they make money off that. And for me, it's not like the creatives that I work with do it, whether there was money in it or not. And that's why I started. That's why I keep doing what I do, is because I just love it. Like, I absolutely love it. And we, even to this day, we still work for free, and we still, this is just how it is. You know what I mean? If you love what you do, you have to be prepared to do it for the rest of your life. And it's not always about the paycheck. And I think that's why I created my agency, and that's why I curated the board that I curated. And it's got a real mix in there.
I think the language that the narrative that comes out of your work, though, is going to be definitely paid for, because what you're doing now is groundbreaking.
Yeah, definitely.
And Kristin, a privilege that you're here, because it shows to us, and this is what I really wanted to talk about, is you took your degree in fashion and textiles, but your industry, it shows students here the direction can be very different, can't it?
Yeah.
Than you initially expected.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's this idea in life that we're supposed to have this one purpose, this one career, but in fact there's many things that inspire us. Like, we have purposes, and we're multi-talented. So I would...
And the application.
Yeah.
You applied yourself to a completely different route.
Yes, definitely. But I do feel quite privileged that I was able to get these opportunities that wouldn't necessarily be, and I know you're saying, like, we shouldn't feel privileged just for having, like, opportunities that other people have, which is, unfortunately the way sometimes you feel. And
gratitude.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for this network that I'm a part of, because I genuinely don't think I would have been able to get into the film industry, because I wasn't someone who knew anyone in the industry. I wasn't someone who had family in the industry. I didn't study costume. So those doors wouldn't naturally open for me. And through these organizations that want to spotlight diverse talents, you're able to get your foot in the door. And in fact, they've got such a good reputation at this point that productions come to us to offer us jobs, to advertise jobs to us. And in response, the network gives a statement saying, we expect our members to be in safe, supported environments, working environments for diverse talent.
Fantastic.
Which is amazing.
Which is amazing, and it's a great, they're privileged. And we're privileged to see you, because you take the baton on for us. And I think for a lot of inspiring students out there, you help them think that a different direction is open to them. Mm-hmm. You worked in movies. The privilege of being where you are now, Deborah.
Privilege of being where I am.
Well, you started lecturing as well.
Yeah, I've started lecturing. I think the privilege is that I completely agree with you that, my career has taken it's always been fashion related, it's always been creative. But one thing that I learnt when I went to Italy was that as a creative person, you do not have to stick to one route at all. And actually, your life will be so much more enjoyable if you do delve into many different areas and different things. And just take on opportunities. If somebody offers you something, if you don't know how to do it, figure out how to do it and get it done. I was literally, offered this job with Italian Elle over a coffee. And I thought, shit, I haven't written since my A-levels. Yes, of course I'll do it. I'd love to do it. And I came back to London and I did a short course at London College of Communication, and voila, I was a journalist. It's crazy. And literally...
Take the opportunity.
My first job was, I think, to interview Stella McCartney or something, and I'd literally just done the interview part of the course, and I got a phone call and I was like, yes, I could do that, I've just studied it. You know, so it's really about, you know, having conviction within yourself and really just trying stuff. You know, I think that's a really big thing to take away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah. Anita, we'll end with you only because I think you've, from another country, you were very minoritarized there, yes?
Kind of. I mean, I reap a lot of different privileges as well. And like one of those, I mean, I got very senior in advertising. Do you know what I mean? So when it came to starting Diet Prata and trying to, I guess, commercialize that, my privilege came from other really senior brown people offering me lots of opportunities. Like I remember the Days 100 had just like, it was the last application day, or I can't even remember what it was, but I remember somebody at Days, an Indian person, was like, you need to put Anita in that. And it was just like those small things. Like someone was like, we need to write an article about you. So these people, South Asian people, were understanding the importance of Diet Prata as a cultural contributor. And in turn, helped elevate me and my platform. And in turn, I mean, when my profile raises, I'm able to create more opportunity for the community. And that is...
Secular.
I mean, absolutely. And I also feel that, like, advertising, like, coming from advertising, as awful of an industry as it is, it's kind of like fashion with, like, without any of the fun stuff. Like, there's no parties, like, there's no cool clothes. It's just, like, all the shit stuff. But just, I mean, as terrible as the time I had in it, it's like, I would not take it back for the world. I'm able to, I know how to budget a project. I know how to pitch a document. I know how to put an idea together. I know how to speak to an audience. I know how to speak a different, you know, that advertising language, that language that clients are so used to receiving. And so those, like those
things
privileges.
like pitching. I mean, God.
That's the
how
thing.
Many people don't know how to pitch.
Well, that's
they don't teach you. Sorry, you don't teach how to pitch at university.
I think
They
presentation
need to.
decks is like the single most important thing that I've taken in my career. And I feel like that is almost the difference between me in terms of like the privileges I have and like perhaps other grassroots platforms that don't necessarily have the knowledge to scale, to budget, to charge their worth, to be able to talk this language, to be able to pitch an idea that just makes sense. You know, that's not kind of jumping around everywhere. So that is where I feel like my privilege lies, and I'm very grateful for it.
Very great. We're very grateful that you run with it. Keep running, because the privilege is watching Diet Prata and observing how it's going to. It's just amazing. Thank you so much, all of you. I'm very diligent on time.
Thank you very much, Davina. Sorry, Asia. Thank you, honey. Yes, and thank you very much to our audience. What we would like to do while you're in place is just get a few audience pictures, please, Eleanor, if you wouldn't mind just coming up and taking a few. And hopefully everyone's okay with that. The last summit that we did in October, we didn't document any of it. So we have 10 minutes now. We actually have a little bit longer than that because you did bring it in so punctually, yes. 4 questions, and obviously back to our panel. While Andrew goes up and sets the music, directly afterwards, we just go straight out into a slightly warmer room, you'll be pleased to hear. Because I don't know about you, I haven't got enough clothing on in here. So it's lovely and warm out there, and there's refreshments. But I just want to pick up on a couple of things that I was hearing from the panel. We don't or won't take on the cultural burden of performing our culture. And we are looking for talent before race identity. And we use our position to amplify and to lift up others. And that's the joy of the conversation that we've had as more and more diverse creatives are able to educate and operate in a space of cultural competency. And that's one of the things that came back from the first phase study we did with students. 800 students responded to it. You can download it from the FACE website. But white students said that they recognized that they weren't getting the cultural competency when they looked around and saw that they didn't have a variety of academics, and they didn't have black and brown conversation around culture. And of course, students of colour said that they felt unsupported in having to educate the room about issues that weren't being brought up by white academics. And it's something that Davina said, and at Davina's panel, Sharon actually said it straight away. It's easy, just employ more black and brown academics. And of course, coming into the industry now, being able to see a broader range of creatives giving us a wider opportunity for conversations around identity is thrilling, and hearing everybody's responses. Thank you. So I'd like to ask the audience for questions so that we can make the most, really rinse this panel out. Really squeeze the most you can out of them, because it's not often that you get professionals all together in a room with such varied experience. And here they are, just waiting to answer your question. Imagine if you were actually trying to get that question answered and you were on Instagram trying to just poke that person and say, could you please answer my question, or could you please see my email? And here you are with this incredible opportunity. So I'd just like to see hands shoot up. I've got my eyes closed, and I'm... Oh, great. Lady in turquoise, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's just to follow on from the point about education and employing more teachers, black and brown teachers. I'm actually a teacher here. But I mentioned last time I was at this event as an audience that I was given a redundancy notice. So my redundancy is actually in place in 2 weeks' time now. And the organisation that I worked for was an anti-racist organisation called Shades of Noir, which has been literally kicked out of this university in the past few months, alongside the director of it, Aisha Richards. I mean, it's a very controversial topic, you know, so this is where it's at. It's not like it's a brand new conversation, you know, so just to kind of touch on that, the reality of what you're talking about, you know. I've renamed this college actually called Crime Watch, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been teaching the past since 2018 and dealing with... Yeah, of course I did. But I'm talking about a black lady that's been kicked. I mean, is this just a conversation just so you can look good here? Or do you really want to know? Yeah, but so you want me to leave the microphone and just give it to somebody else? Is that what you're asking me to do? Yeah, I won't take too much more time, but I think it's important to highlight that. I don't know, do you teach here, by the way? Do you guys teach here? Well, I do, and I've been teaching it all year round. And trust me, you know, there's reasons why. I appreciate that, you know. But if you just want to sit here because you're in Central St Martin's in the LVMH Theatre, then I think maybe you need to have a look at that as well. I'll pass this on. Well, are you interested in knowing how that there was an anti-racist... I'm responding to the point to this lady here who mentioned about more academics being employed. You know, so it's a point. I mean, in response, is it a problem, like posing this point, a fact about this institution? Okay, I mean, do you want to take it as a question then?
Yeah, take it as a question.
What, no,
is it a question? Is it a question,
well,
or is it an observation?
Look, hang on, what is this like? I mean, you know, like, it's a... Okay, what are you going to say?
Hi, nobody's trying to silence you. The point is, we're here for a short amount of time, and we would all like to kind of converse collectively about something. If you've got a point to make that's directed at somebody specifically, take it there is what we're trying to say in terms of a forum. Right now, for the last 5 minutes of this...
It's not really direct.
If I could just finish for 1 second, please.
Yeah.
If it's not a question, then it can be taken into a different space, because actually it seems quite sensitive and something that can be taken offline outside of this forum in this moment.
Let me put it as a question. So what have you got to say about an anti-racist organisation that was here being kind of thrown out of the university. How would you like to respond to that? Yeah, fair enough. I mean, like, really.
We've got one. Thank you.
So the question that I have was,
Sorry, guys, let's all be quiet.
yeah, the question that I have is like basically directed at like the creative director position. So like just like the question that I have is like when we think about what the creative director is today, like speaking about like Pharrell's appointment, are we actually thinking about like what it was previously before like big conglomerates like LVMH took over versus what it is now? Because like if we dissect the word creative director and what that person is, like when before like conglomerates took over, it was necessary for like these visionaries to be able to visualize something and be able to make these things because the team was so small and because they had limited resources, because it's more so like family-owned businesses. Then when companies such as like LVMH took over and these became conglomerates, now they necessarily didn't need people who could do these things, who had like formal background from like schools like CSM. They needed visionaries. They needed people who had like a vision. So like, with that being said, like someone such as like Pharrell's appointment, like me personally, being like a black minority from the Bahamas, I feel as though that was like the perfect appointment, like creative-wise and business-wise, because at the end of the day, like this is a business. Pharrell, what Virgil brought to LV was not necessarily what you guys thought was just hype, but community and what he brought was community and like visuals. Pharrell, LV wanted to capitalize and stick with that. The best person to hire was Pharrell, and at the end of the day, like Pharrell's isn't like what I found really like weird was to like call this situation like a hype man situation. And if we track back what like he had, Pharrell had multiple collaborations with LV, which was the accessory, the Millionaires, which was one of LV's like most like sold accessory. Virgil even brought it back, and it was still the most sold accessories. Then we think about like Human Made and Billionaire Boys, which are still relevant today. So to have somebody in that position who has been within the fashion space and a visionaire, not being from a school like Central St. Martin's, or not having like this formal background, someone such as me, that made me feel so good, that because that made me feel as though that like I could do it. You know,
Exactly.
It isn't necessarily like a hype man situation. It is necessarily like, you know, we don't need a formal training to do these positions, because at the end of the day, like Steve Jobs was just a visionary. He knew nothing about computers, but now we have this. So like, is the creative director position, speaking like understanding our privilege of being at CSM, being in CSM, does the creative director position needs to be from somebody of formal training, or do we need to actually look at the people who surround him and feed the students that, like, listen, like, this is what you need to be attacking, and not a position that opens up every 2 to 20 years and tell every person of color that that's the job that you need to be attacking.
So, in theory, your question is, should we be directing students to other types of role within the industry outside of just being a creative director?
Exactly, not just like feeding them that one position, having like the whole
100%.
whole community.
Absolutely.
You know?
I think the ecosystem of fashion is so much bigger than the 5 or 6 roles we typically talk about: stylist, fashion designer, Edward Enningful, model, and whatever else. Like, I think actually there's pattern cutter, there's fabric and trims, there's like production, there's all of these things. And I think that ultimately
we ourselves buy into the vision of becoming the creative director, because creative directors these days are rock stars. You've got Olivier at Bauman. You've got like all of these people who are more of a name before the brand sometimes, but actually it's the people behind the business. In theory, those people who did come out of, you know, the show at LV, not saying that that representation of people was necessarily, you know, diverse, but I think those are the people who build the brand. When I was at Burberry, Christopher Bailey would set the vision for what it was for the season, and then actually there would be a team of 50 people or so that would work on the Prorsum collection. So actually I think it's about what is the research that we do ourselves as students, not just what we're taught in education. And I think that as well, to your point, education isn't always the route that we need to go down to get to where we'd like to be. I didn't go to university, but I now have a 17-year career. My first job was at Burberry at 19, producing the runway shows. So I think that every single job is a possibility and an opportunity. It's just how we look at applying ourselves to get to that point is all I'd say.
Hi there. I think it's working, yeah. My question hopefully is quite a simple one, and it's kind of to you, Deborah, if that's okay. You mentioned about trying to separate talent from race, and I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to know, how do you do it?
Well, I don't necessarily separate it. I just look at what people do and look at whether I'm interested in what they do, and you know, if it resonates with me and if it has some sort of impact on me.
So I should have said recognise, actually.
So,
How do you recognise the talent?
I don't separate at all. I mean, it's just that I'm looking for talent. That's it, full stop. You know, and because of my ecosystem, because of my connections, because I'm in this position, I will have the opportunity to, you know, employ people who look like me, because that's a lot of the people that I know look like me. But at the same time, I would not exclude somebody who doesn't look like me or who has a disability, because I understand that they've got a hell of a lot to bring to the table too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point there.
I think also to add upon that, when you're actually employing somebody for a campaign, campaigns have briefs. And it's not just because somebody... The worst job in the world, I've always said in the 90s, definitely was a model. I mean, you'd walk through the door and it wasn't about you at all. It wasn't about you. It was just about what the brief was. You know, there was a lot of heartache there. It's a very painful place to be. Sorry, Enzima. Sorry.
It's a reflection of the times. So it's like a whole chicken and egg thing. The reflection of the times would impact and have a negative impact on how maybe the panel were making a decision. So it's all related. You can't, I think it's quite difficult to think you can sort of separate them. So yeah, of course it wasn't about the model.
Of course, it's
the
moment, of course,
of the attitudes of that
moment.
Time.
The nice thing about, you said a really sweet thing the other day on the phone to me. You were talking about was it a modelling agency?
Oh, yes. So one of the questions was about position and whether I feel it's changed. And I said to Asia, I said, oh my God, about a year ago, I was doing a campaign for Sabira, and the agent actually said to me when I called him up, and he was like, you know, well, do you want any white girls in your package? And I burst out laughing. I have been in fashion for so many years, and the majority of the time, like, you know, say 6 years ago, if I ever got a package, I'd be lucky if there was a black girl or a brown girl in it. So the fact that he said that to me, I just found hilarious. And I said, yeah, you know, it's really changed, hasn't it? And he said, yeah, black girls are killing it right now.
Sorry, I want to add to that as well, because that's a really interesting point that you've made, you know. And I think there are some designers who have been doing it from time. They've appreciated the beauty of a black woman from time. And there are those who are hanging on, you know, to the coattails because this is what we're supposed to be doing, you know. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. More black models are being employed, which is a great thing. But I think it's very important still to differentiate between the authentic players who, you know, where it's bona fide and it's honest appreciation, or from those who for, oh, what's the time? Oh, how much longer do I have to employ another, you know? So that's very important. There is still differences. in.
Sorry, we're taking over, but I think that's really important around the debate around Pharrell. Now, I think what we're not talking enough about is LVMH and their power and their purpose as well and their privilege to. But for Pharrell, would we all take the gig? Yes, we would. Is it good that he's taking the gig? Yes, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But I think his position, I think his position is activism in a way that is not, you know, Virgil was very different. Virgil had Pyrex and he had Off-White, but I agree. I think we probably need to cut some slack for Pharrell and look at LVMH and look at what their purpose
We
is.
totally agree.
Yeah.
For the
I
problem,
don't
I
have-
totally
yeah,
don't
I
have an
don't
issue
have
with
any
Pharrell.
issues with Pharrell.
I feel like that's my
We
fault.
think he's
No, but
That's my fault. Everybody's like, Daniel doesn't like Pharrell. No, it's not that. Pharrell's awesome. Like, like he's incredible. Nobody's saying that he doesn't deserve to be where he is. I'm just saying that there are many other deserving talents, not just black men, is also the point I made before. Because we're talking about black identity a lot in this. And what I'm saying is that Pharrell is phenomenally talented, sure. But also, what does that say to the design student who has gone to Central St. Martin's or Westminster, or wherever it might be, and spent £40,000 to try and get into the industry? And I understand that Pharrell's got Billionaire Boys Club, so on and so forth. Awesome. He's dope.
Tiffany.
But what? Yeah, Tiffany, whatever. I don't care. But like, the reality is, like, you know, he then puts out a song on Spotify, like, afterwards. Like, he's making extra money off of the back of that. I don't, like, Pharrell's awesome, but I'm not trying to say that what he did wasn't great. I just think that there are other people who also need to be given opportunities in our industry in that sense.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to, we're not also saying that it, you know, has to be at Louis Vuitton, you know, just generally give the opportunities, you know, to especially black women, please.
Yeah, this is more of an admiration because I think what every single one of you do is amazing. And something that came to mind, especially my work, is, you know, where we're progressing slowly. And things are changing slowly, but there's always something to adapt to and change to. And especially what I found halted is, okay, now there's something else. So one is, how do you mentally, as marginalized people already, switch off from personal to work, and especially when you are the product of your work. Secondly, the economy and how creatives, university students, one conversation that I've had a lot is post-uni, people can't afford to be in this industry. And how are we safeguarding that? How are we navigating that? And then the mentor schemes, if there's a price to that, if they're free. Getting to London, not making things so London-centric. How are we navigating that space?
Yeah. I feel like I've talked a lot.
I can't speak to the mentally switched off part because I have no fucking clue. If anyone knows, like, please tell me immediately. But I think it's just like, if we've all opened our own doors, you included, it's about keeping those doors open for other people to walk through. And I feel like that is not necessarily an obligation. What you, like, I can't remember who was speaking about. You were speaking about, like, just being good at what you do. You don't necessarily have to be an activist. So I think that while it is such a massive issue, it is so hard to combat, right? And you've got, like, mentoring programs, you've got networking, you've got events like this where there's, like, almost like an open forum, it feels like. And yeah, I just feel like, I mean, can anyone else speak to this? I've kind of lost my train of thought, to be completely
only thing I was
honest.
gonna say-
I think I got it all out though.
Just with, like, our mentoring program, it's now open to people across the UK, and we allocate 25% of places specifically to people from outside of London. And for those people who come from outside of London, we give them a £100 travel bursary for the cohort so that they can come to London if they want to, or go and use it to go to a gallery, because we also understand that actually you need money to be able to do some of these things. Our mentoring programs are all free. The brands that we partner with are the ones who are able to support us in what we do. And so actually that's what's allowed us to now have, or be coming up to cohort 6 and have 110 people go through it, because of what the brands have done. And actually, you know, mentee there, another mentee up there somewhere. But like all of that is great because we're giving them the space to be.
Can I just make a point, sorry, about what it's Kirsten, isn't it? What you were saying about the Black Costume Network and companies coming to you, trying to find black and brown creatives. Are they paying you?
Yes.
Okay.
Trainees always get paid. There isn't...
No, I mean, are the companies paying you to find... Because they're trying to recruit people to come into their industries. Are they paying you to connect creatives, black and brown creatives, to their industries? Because I think I'm asking that question because I think corporations have to take responsibility. They have to have, their kind of, if they're not going to have a department that is going to specifically look at their recruitment strategies, and they need to outsource those networks. They should be paying those networks to recruit.
I'll need to ask them and see if they are getting paid, but it really is just a community of people who are, talking to each other, adding more people, and then because of the good reputation, because of all the good work that we do, we've gotten all these productions reach out to us. Like the film industry tends to not have job applications. It tends to be who you know, and hiring the same few people over and over again. So this organization really does help introduce new people into the industry. But it just feels so much more than just finding work. It really is a community. We have annual meetups. We have like a picnic that we all go and socialize and just have this wee family. But we're being asked back because we're good, basically.
So we are coming to time. Final question, that burning question. Who would like to ask the very last question? Lady over here.
A good one.
Hi, everyone. Just with all of your talents, amazing, and what you've done in your careers, I teach fashion students. I do fashion theory, and I'm just wondering, is there any advice that you would give to a student that is marginalised or global majority?
Good question.
Yeah. How long have you got?
So one of the things, so I've done a little stint this year of lecturing, and one of the things that actually I say to all of my students is get as much work experience while you're in university as possible, regardless of your background, disability, ability, whatever. I think that for me that is the most important thing, is to try and get any type of work experience you can while you're still at university, because it's the networks that you're making while you're doing that. When you go to events, or that they'll invite you to different events, and you'll have the opportunity to see really what that industry is like when you go and do that work experience.
I think we were watching the first panel together, weren't we? And there was a conversation with a student talking about getting free work experience out of them, and graduating. And I'm sorry, but the truth is, nobody here has not worked for free. No, I haven't. Haven't you? Well, that's because you're Beyonce, darling. Being Beyonce is a different thing. You got a price tag. But I don't think that's incredible. That's savvy. But I would say, even now, we work to an extent because it is it's not about you being used. I'm so sorry, it doesn't come out across like that. I've got two students up here, who ACT student up here and a student of mine, who we're going to do something incredible tomorrow, and we've been doing something incredible for the last 2 days. Would you say, Katie, Senna, that you're gaining something from this? Yeah, we're doing a shoot with these incredible people for the next 2 days. And you didn't get that experience at university, did you? So make yourself empowered with what you learn on these experiences. Every step is important.
I think that's true, but unless you've got the backing from your family and the home environment where you can do that for free, you can't do it. I come from a single parent working class family. So actually, hang on, I couldn't just go and do that for free. Like, I worked 4 days on the shop floor at Selfridges and did 1 day with
Daniel,
VM.
single parent family.
No,
thought,
it's
thought
not.
I was a loser
No,
because
no,
I was
no.
doing fashion.
But it's not-
worked every job going. Marcella, we did that. We did the Tequila Girl thing together. we did everything together to make it work. Yes. So yeah, first job at Vivienne Westwood, 3 months no pay.
No, I understand
Yeah,
that, but
and
I think we
continue to
can't just promote that you should just do for...
No, what I'm saying is embrace what you're learning in that experience. Sell it well. Sell it well later on.
What works for you? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Students to thine own self be true.
Yeah.
You have to know yourself, right? Daniel did not spend a day working without being paid. Did he get paid for overtime? In every answer, there is another question. So keep asking those questions yourself, right? Because the person who asked as a minoritized person, how, when, your time is now, right? Make use of the time and the resources wherever you may find them.
And thank you very much for those words of wisdom. We have run to time. I'd like you to join me in thanking this amazing panel. Thank you very much to everybody. Do join us outside if there are any academics in the room who would like to interest their institution in hosting the next FACE Summit. Please make yourselves known. Thank you.
We could do the backing.
That was great.